I'm not naturally a city guy, and I'm not naturally a church planting guy. This wasn't the plan. My plan was to stay and raise my family here amongst a church of people that I love, a family that I love, and in an area that I can't say I love New Jersey, but I'm comfortable here. I'm comfortable here, and I know. However, about 4 years ago, when we're actually watching one of the Sovereign Grace Ministry videos, it was talking about church planting, this thought just came to my mind. Great Flat Guy's doing that. I literally had this thought, I would never want to do that. And I just felt God very kindly just asked me a question, why? And I had a long list of reasons as to why, some of which I just said. My family goes here, I go here, and I think there's much work to be done here that I was excited about being involved in whatever way I could. So I had that question, why, and I had an answer for it. But then 2 days later, I was going through my regular Bible reading time and happened to be reading through the book of Romans, and God directed me to Romans 15. And Paul, in describing this, is talking about, just a little bit of background, why he was moving on, what drove Paul, why he didn't just stay and plant one church, what kind of drove him. And Paul says this in Romans 15:20. He says, "Thus I make it my ambition to preach the gospel, not where Christ has already been named, lest I build on someone else's foundation. But as it is written, those who have never been told of him will see, and those who have never heard will hear." And then Paul goes on to say this is why he hadn't been able to go to Rome, because God had a mission for him. And so he wanted to go to Rome. And I was just confronted with, man, was me staying in New Jersey, was it really about me? Really about what I believe God's mission for me to be here? Or was it more just about me and what I wanted for myself? And quite frankly, I was confronted with a lot of selfishness. And I think God asked me a more specific question. And that question this time was what? If there are places that need to hear the gospel, places where Christ has not yet been named, and the primary vehicle for the gospel going forward is for churches to be planted, then why are you not willing to be part of that? And that word willing really got my attention, because I wasn't sure yet if God was calling me to be a church planter, but what I was confronted with was, why am I not even willing to pray about it? And so my prayers began to saying, okay, God, I want to be willing. I want to be willing to be used by you. I'm not sure if you want me to use. I'm not sure if I'm the right guy to be used in this way. But Lord, I want to be willing. I don't want to close a door. And so I actually started to let the pastors know that I was thinking about this. This was before I came on staff, and then came on staff here 3 years ago with this kind of question in mind. Lord, could you potentially have me be a church planter? And as I came on staff here, two things happened. So as you know, that's right when we launched the Alpha program, which I had the privilege to be involved in starting up, as well as our Beta program. And through that, really what happened is it seemed like as we moved into this building, God just gave our congregation just this fresh desire for evangelism. And man, we've had more converts in the last 2 years since being here than we've probably had in the previous 15 of our church's history. And hasn't that been awesome to see what God's doing? And so it just built my faith, like, wow, God, you are really saving people. And that was just exciting to be a part of. But then the second thing that happened, it wasn't just exciting, it really built my heart to church plant. Because I was freshly amazed with the power of the gospel to save. And as I was meeting lost people in larger quantities than I had since being in college, I was freshly confronted with, man, there's a lot of people who are lost and who need the gospel of Jesus. And so Alpha really became almost like a mini church plant. I mean, we're starting up. We had to arrange space. We had to recruit and train small group leaders. I was teaching every week, overseeing music ministry, and thinking through follow-up discipleship and integration into the life of the church. It was almost a mini church, and it was exciting. It was exciting what God was doing. And so, what happened in my heart is, God, what if you could take a small slice of what you're doing here, and what if we just transplant that into another neighborhood and watch your gospel be preached somewhere else? What could you do? What could you do there? And so we started getting excited just about the idea of church planting in general. And so as we got excited about the idea of church planting, the question became, where? Where do we plant a church? I think there's a lot of exciting areas where we could plant churches in South Jersey. And I'm excited for this church and this church's desire to plant more churches throughout, these surrounding communities. And I've got a stack of research done for whoever the next church planter is for those things. However, as I was praying about church planting, one of the things I started doing was listening to a pastor who talks about a lot about church planting, whose name is Tim Keller. If you're unaware of who Tim Keller is, he's a pastor of a church up in Manhattan. I've given you several of his resources in the resource packet. And it's hard to listen to Pastor Keller and not have your heart be stirred for this city. And that's what began to be happened. I felt as I was listening to him that God was asking me this question. If churches need to be planted so that the gospel can be heard, then where is there the greatest, most strategic need for the gospel to be heard? And as I asked that question, the answer became very apparent as Philadelphia just jumped off the map. Because in Philly, not that it's any more special than any other area, but in Philly you have a density of unbelievers that's unlike many other areas. The fifth largest city in the nation, less than 7% overall population believe in Jesus Christ. You heard the neighborhood that we're beginning to look at now is less than 3%. That is thousands upon tens of thousands of people who have yet to hear, the gospel. And Philadelphia is also an influential city. It plays a key role in our country's economy. And so it's this influential city, and Christians aren't there for a large part. They aren't there being an influence in it. So my heart became, man, God, what could happen? What could you be doing with Philadelphia? So I started praying for Philly. I still wasn't sure if God was supposed to be part of it, but my prayer became this: God, I know there's a need for the church in Philly, and I started praying for whatever that church would be. And I said, Lord, if you want me to be part of it, just make it clear. Because there were still other areas in South Jersey that I was excited about. So praying that prayer, Lord, there's a need. Would you be willing? And one of the things I started doing, one of the things I'd encourage you to do if you're thinking about being part of this plant, is I started spending time in Philadelphia praying for the city and just seeing what the Lord would stir during that time. And one of those times I was walking down South Street, and as I was walking down South Street, actually one of the shots that you saw in the video, right by the colorful tiles, there was a group of young guys about my age coming up, just laughing, joking, looking like they're having a good time. And on that corner, there was a street preacher who started locking eyes with them and telling them how they were living lives of fornication, how they were going to hell, turn and burn type message. And the guys just kind of mocked them and walked on. My thought became, that's the only Christianity they're going to hear. And I went to Romans 10. Anyone who calls the name of the Lord shall be saved. But how are they to call on him of whom they've never heard? And there was more moments and more things that happened, but I think for me, that was the moment where, okay, all right, how are these guys going to hear? Not by someone yelling at them in a corner, but by their friend hanging out with them in a coffee shop and talking about Jesus. Coming into that friend's house, hopefully, and seeing a marriage that reflects Christ. Seeing parenting that reflects Christ. Seeing friendship that reflects Christ. Not just words spoken from a bullhorn. And that's kind of how God drew my heart for Philly. It really was and is a desire for the need of these people who otherwise would not hear, to hear the gospel. And not just from a church service, but from the church, the real church, the Christians being released into the community and being the church of Christ and a gospel witness Monday through Saturday. And so it began, okay, we're going to Philly, but where? Philly's a big city. So let me transition into describing Philly, because I think that will make it clear as to why we're going to the little bit of neighborhood that we are going. So Philadelphia, just in general, to be aware of, is seeing a real resurgence. So there was the white flight back in the 80s, which really hurt the city in many ways. But actually, worldwide right now, there's something of this phenomenon going on called re-urbanization. So there's just tons of people moving back into the city, and it's largely driven by people of my generation. And the reason why they're saying they're going back to the cities, there's just a real hunger for authentic and tight community and relationship. And so people just want to be together and want to be a part of something that's kind of bigger than themselves. And so they're flocking back to cities. And Philadelphia is kind of perfectly set up to fit that desire. Philadelphia is known as a city of neighborhood. So it's really interesting. If you ask someone who lives in Philadelphia, where do you live? They usually don't say Philadelphia. They'll say their city. They'll say their neighborhoods. They'll say Bella Vista. They'll say Bridesburg. They'll say Mayfair. They'll say West Philly. They'll say Cobbs Creek. They'll say, South Philly. They'll tell you where actually because there's a real strong sense of community and identity. There's all these little almost cities within a city. And it's actually kind of unique that way. And it's one of the really cool things I think about it. So there's lots of neighborhood pride, neighborhood relationships. And one of the things that's really neat about the city and kind of, I think, blew my mind a little bit is you bring in all these suburban myths into the city. And one of the myths was that people were actually unfriendly and it'd be hard. Man, we've gotten in more conversations just walking down the street with people than I've had probably in my neighborhood in the past 2 years. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's Philly, so people are rough and raw, and so a lot of those conversations are laced with profanity. But they're real conversations, and it's unbelievable. And the reason they're there is because there's a heart for community. People aren't there just to keep to themselves. They're there to talk and be with other people. And at the heart of this resurgence and community focus is South Philadelphia. South Philadelphia finds itself in a unique place. And thanks for pulling that up, Catherine. And that it's, you can actually, I'm sorry, you're not Catherine. Catherine's my other administrator. You're filling in for Catherine tonight. Thanks for doing that. If you go back to the big one, that'd be helpful. Thank you. So South Philly, which is all right in here, finds itself in a really neat place. And then you have the bustling, economy of Center City. But then in the past 5 years, there's been tons of development along the river here. So you have an IKEA move. I mean, there's a huge shopping centers that have moved in, tons of restaurants and all kinds of things going on there. And then, you can't see here, it's further cut off. But in the past 2 years, there's been tons of resurgence going on around the Navy Yard. And there's actually about $2 billion tied up in the Navy Yard right now in just personal investment. So GlaxoSmithKline is moving a huge research facility down there. Urban Outfitters is moving their worldwide headquarters there. So they're anticipating actually in the next 5 years to about 30,000 jobs to be created right in the Naval Yard. And so South Philly is kind of squeezed in between all these different bustling economies. And so, home prices in this area are going through the roof. So we're trying to get in quick before they get too much. And people are just flocking to that area. So it's, in many ways, people who study urbanography and things like that are calling South Philly the new heart of this city. And so it's a really influential place, and it's a real a place just of bustling economy, lots of stuff going on. And one of the cool things about this place, not only is there tons of stuff going on, but it's also one of the most racially diverse places in the city. So Philadelphia is typically, because it's neighborhood driven, is actually typically, there's the black neighborhoods, there's the white neighborhoods, there's the Asian neighborhoods, and so forth. What's kind of crazy about this is it's typically been, this has typically been the African American neighborhood, and this has typically been, the Catholic neighborhood. But since so many people are moving in from all over, you have the highest density of Asians living in this area outside of Chinatown. You have a huge Latino population, huge African American population, lots of young, urban professionals. There's lots of coffee shops, so the hipsters are making a resurgence. And then you still have the traditional Catholics who have been there for. We met someone who'd been in their house for 100 years, have been passed down from generation. It was just wild. So yesterday actually we spent the afternoon hanging out in Dickinson Square Park, but you can actually go to the next slide just to get a little bit further in. So Dickinson Square Park. So this is kind of the neighborhood that we're looking at and planting the church. Is really this is South Street, which is kind of South Street separates Center City from South Philly. So we're looking really from South Street all the way down to, about Snyder, which is a little bit further down from here. But kind of on Washington Ave, and then on the east side of Broad. Washington Ave being the heart. So this is kind of right here. This is going to be the heart of the church plant. This is the Southwark neighborhood, and this is the Pensport neighborhood down here. So we're hanging out at Dickinson Square Park, which is a new park that was built about 2 years ago because of all the resurgence going on. And it was just a perfect picture of the neighborhood. There was about 150 people there, just hanging out. I mean, Sophie got out of the car, and you could tell she was from the suburbs because she just didn't know what to do. There were so many people. She was just frozen. And then she started to warm up. But then I've never been in an area where you just see so many people from, there's probably 6 different languages being spoken at this park. It was wild. There was everyone from, you had people speaking Vietnamese, you had people speaking Spanish, you had the grandmothers there, you had the hipsters showing up doing hula hoops. It was wild. I've just never been a part of anything like it. And so yet, while this area in many ways is just really thriving, the churches in this area have all but died out. And there's churches. It's not that there's not churches. There's churches, but what I mean by churches is those that believe that faith in Jesus alone is what saves alone. They have all but left the city. So while there's in this area, there's a couple churches, and there's some bigger churches doing great gospel ministry. But as far as Christians actually living in the neighborhood, again, you're looking at less than 3%. So there's actually 2 pastors who planted a church in the last 5 years, one on the west side of Broad, one on the east side of Broad, and I've met with and just was drawing them out and asking about the area. And one of them with tears in their eyes was pleading, please come. Please come. I will give you money. I will let you use the facility we're using. I will send people from my church to help you get it started. Please come. We need help. And your heart just begins to break. As you walk up and down the streets, your heart begins to break as you see people, they're just in bondage to sin. Bondage in some ways to drugs and alcohol, so you see people just out on the streets. But then others in bondage, as they're in bondage to success. And you see them with their big center city job. And I was actually meeting with a college buddy of mine we had fallen out of touch with, called me up out of the blue, said he wanted to get together to talk about the Bible, which I said great. And he lives actually right off Tasker Street, so 4th and Tasker, and which was wild. I had no idea. So we meet up and we're talking, and he basically said, Jeff, I've realized all my life goals and I have nothing. What do I do? And so there's 2 types of bondages, isn't there? And both need to be freed by the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so that's kind of a description of where we're going. That's kind of a description of the demographic that we're looking. So I like that it's influential. I like that it's resurging, that there's much ethnicity. And part of what even gets me excited about that is, man, what if some Vietnamese people get saved? And now we're planting churches, all overseas. I mean, how cool would that be with indigenous missionaries? I mean, Jesus said, make disciples of all nations. And that can be hard sometimes for us to get up and go to another nation. But man, when the nations all gather in one place, what a unique opportunity that is. So those are just kind of the reasons why we're excited about planting there, why we want to plant there, and why we think that it's a strategic neighborhood, not just for that plant, but as you heard from me before, it really is my desire. And I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start talking about the vision of the church plant. So that's the area. Then we talk about the vision for the church plant. Christ Church is going to be about making, maturing, and multiplying disciples of Jesus Christ through the power of the Holy Spirit for the glory of God. In the city, there are so many needs that need to be met. And so a real temptation is to either get overwhelmed by these needs or to become distracted from what is most important. So what is most important in this city is for disciples of Jesus to be made. Because if disciples of Jesus are made in the city, then the other needs of the city will begin to work themselves out. So for example, there's a real crisis in education in Philadelphia. You have tons of schools shutting down, all kinds of corruption amongst the administration. Well, how do you meet that? How do you meet that need? Well, you start seeing administrators get converted. And now they're not siphoning off money and being embezzlers, but they're actually putting that money to use for the schools. You see teachers become Christians. And all of a sudden, they're not there just to kind of, because they had a job, but they're there to reach their students with the gospel, and they're there to serve. And so what turns the school around? It's the gospel. It's the gospel. And so if we went in trying to just, reach the school, make the school a better place. Well, the best way to do that is to preach the gospel so that people can come to know the school. And not just so that we kind of see those needs met, but we want to be about disciples of Jesus, because ultimately, regardless of whatever need people have in the city, their most fundamental important need is to be forgiven by Jesus through the blood of Jesus Christ. And so we want to keep that in view. And so we want to be out making disciples through telling the gospel of Jesus Christ with words that are authenticated by good deeds. And I think deeds are really important. I think they're going to be really important for us in the city in particular in order to gain credibility. There's lots of street preachers and there's lots of track hander-outers in the city. What there isn't a lot of is Christians actually rolling up their sleeves and getting to work in the city. And so you look at Matthew 5:16, Jesus says, be a light. But then how does he talk about the light? So that they might see your good deeds and give glory to the Father in heaven. And so a vital part of our gospel witness is being committed to doing good deeds. So homework clubs for the kids, street cleanups, 1,000,001 ways that we can get involved in meeting the needs of our community, being committed to showing the gospel in deeds. But what we want to be careful to do is not just show our gospel in deeds. Words are vital. So Romans 10 does say that they cannot hear unless we speak. And so I think often, you can kind of have people who are more deed-oriented and some people who are more word-oriented, and they can be pitted against each other. And I think the reality is the Bible teaches both and they should go hand in hand together. So we want to be a church that's about seeing disciples made, seeing people converted, and that's going to happen as we preach the gospel to them and live out the various implications of the gospel in our neighborhood. But we don't want to just make disciples. We then want to mature as disciples, which I want to do that personally. Anyone coming on the church plant should want to do. And then obviously disciples that are made, that should begin to happen. And so as we all know, maturing as disciples doesn't come from moving on from the gospel, but from understanding more and more how the gospel applies to our lives. And so we want to mature disciples by growing in our understanding and application of the good news of Jesus Christ and what that means for us each and every day. And then finally, we want to multiply disciples. We want to make disciples, mature disciples, and we want to multiply disciples by sending out new church plants to reach new neighborhoods in Philadelphia, which will be our priority, and then throughout the world. You see, right from the start, I want to make sure that it's crystal clear that we are not just about ourselves and what God is going to be doing in and through in the life of this church plant. I don't know, God, we could plant no churches. I have no idea. But I always want to have that willing question. I always want to have that question of, God, what else could you be doing in mind? Because God's a big God, and He's doing a lot of stuff. And so I want to be always looking forward and anticipating what the Lord could do. Content with what He brings, but anticipating what He could do. So we want to be, I've used this phrase, not just a church plant, in the sense that we just plop and don't move, but the sense that we're a multiplying community. One of the things I love, again, about this neighborhood that we're going to be in is it just touches so many other neighborhoods. So what would it look like to have another church over in Point Breeze, which is on the west side of Broad? What would it look like to have, a church plant further down by the stadiums? What would it look like to have a church plant in West Philly? What would it look like to have a church plant in Center City, in Northern Liberties? I mean, that can happen. And one of the cool things about the city, I think, is because it is so neighborhood driven that the reality is if we're starting to draw a lot of people from other neighborhoods, well, all we need is a church planter and bang, that's a church. I don't think we're going to need to have this big ramp up that sometimes other churches in different contexts need. I think being in the city is naturally going to allow us to replicate. That replicate's probably the bad word because each church is going to be a little different, but to multiply out in faster ways, thoughtful ways, strategic ways. We don't want to be hasty in laying the hands on anyone, but I think there's opportunity. I think there's real opportunity, and that is part of my heart and vision and one of the things I'm asking God to do. So that's our mission. Our mission is to make, mature, and multiply as disciples. And then what's the vision? So how's this going to look out? Well, we're going to be about three things. We're going to be about loving Christ first and foremost. So we call ourselves Christ Church because we want to be a community that is most excited about one thing, the gospel of Jesus Christ. We believe that loving Christ is to be pursued in every facet of our lives with our time, work, money, and more as we consider the all-encompassing implications of the gospel. Corporally, we nurture this love for Christ through the gathering of the saints in an assembled setting. So this is Sunday mornings or Saturday nights. Here we will worship Jesus by remembering the gospel through preaching, teaching, singing, praying, and celebrating the sacraments of baptism and communion. Loving Christ is a triune act because in Christ, God the Father is fully revealed and the Holy Spirit is the revealer. So our desire is that the Holy Spirit of God would so fill us with love for the Son of God that the Father God will be glorified in our hearts and through our lives. Second, we want to love each other. Truly loving each other is a radical call amid a church culture of mere Sunday morning attendance and casual involvement. And I know as I say that I'm saying that more for the church at large. That doesn't mark many of you that I know in this room. Thank you for not just being about mere Sunday morning attendance and casual involvement. That's why part of what gets me excited is wondering which of you are going to come because of who I already know you to be. So this loving each other involves mutual care, consistency, and authenticity as we seek to worship the person of Christ and encourage the work of Christ in our lives. Though each Christian has a personal relationship with God, that relationship is fleshed out in community. The Bible calls us members of one body with the expectation that we contribute to the body for the glory of God and the good of His people, serving each other with words and actions. So to be a Christian is to be a person in community, right? Tight, intimate relationships. This is what we see. It's one of the ways we bear God's image. God is a person in community. There is this tight, intimate fellowship between the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so part of the ways of what it means to be in the image of God is for us to work that out amongst each other. And then also think about this. Our love for each other is not just about each other, but ultimately our love for each other is supposed to be so radical, so countercultural, that it catches a watching world's eye and causes them to ask questions. Right? What did Jesus say? They will know you're my disciples by the love you have for one another. Christians' mutual love together is meant to be, in many ways, our greatest apologetic for the truth of the gospel. And so I want to be a church that radically loves each other. And finally, I want to be a church that loves the city. Loving Christ and loving each other leads us to reach out and love to those around us. Our church will be made up of people who live in Philly and are committed to loving this great city in word and deed. With our words, we want to proclaim the gospel so that people might hear and put their faith in Jesus. With our deeds, we want to display the radical love that God has for the city so that people might see our good works and give glory to God. By saying that we love the city, we aren't trying to be exclusive. We're saying that we believe that if we allow God's love for the city to be our love for the city, then God can take these small steps of faithfulness and turn us into a multiplying community that can be used to reach the world. And that is our desire, that we want to be full of love for the city of Philadelphia. We're not going into Philly to whip it back into shape and to win it back for Jesus. Right? We're not going in on a crusade. No, we're going in with hearts and arms wide open in love. We're going in to tangibly show the love of Christ through how we love each other and love the city, both in word and deed. So I see Christ Church as being a church that's actively involved in whatever in the neighborhood. I mean, if you love someone, you don't just sit by and let them do whatever they want, right? No, you're involved. You care. You spend time. And so if we love the city, we're going to hang out in this city. We're going to spend time in the city. And so we want to be a church that's dedicated to doing that. And so I think that has a couple implications as far as what does this mean? Well, one, I think it means that we need to be geographically organized for mission. And what I mean by that is in order for us to be put into practice loving each other and loving the city, I'm convinced that we have to be geographically close to each other in order to flesh that out. So as I've been talking and praying about planning in Philly, what's become abundantly clear to me over the past few years, and I think it's clear as I talk to people who are in Philly, is that the best way to reach Philadelphians is for you to be their neighbor. It's not to plant. We talk about a joke about one of my church planting buddies. We don't plant church services on a Sunday morning. and a bunch of Christians come into the city for a service. No, we plant churches. We plant people who are going to be the church in the neighborhood. And so this is really going to be a community church and have a community identity. It's not going to be a commuter church. And that really is one of the key differences between, I think, suburban and urban churches. Because in the suburbs, it's just part of culture. Everyone drives 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to everything. That's not a big deal. It's just part of what you do. And so, that makes total sense, and that's totally fine. But in the city, that doesn't happen at all. So, Carol, you still don't drive, right? So I don't want to call you out, sorry, but she's lived in the city for, almost her whole life, doesn't drive. It's just a totally different way of thinking about life. And so if we're not going to have cars, not any of us are going to have cars, but if we can't think about driving, we got to think about walking. And we got to think about being close to each other. I think that's going to be vital. So we want to be geographically organized for mission. Not that we won't draw other people from other neighborhoods, but ultimately, long term, my desire would be those people that were being drawn would be turned into other churches that they can walk to. So I think Philly should be reached by walking churches all throughout the city. And there might be a time where there should be some commuters that are coming in, but ultimately, that would be the goal. Second, we're going to need to be relationally driven, not event driven. There's another key differentiator that I want to make sure that we're just clear about. We will, and I want to say this very carefully, but we're not going to probably have a youth ministry to start. We're not going to have Alpha to start. We're not going to have Beta to start. We're not going to have Vital Life courses to start. Those are all great things. I was actively involved in pushing for a lot of those things and love those programs and how they're getting played out here in our church. But for us in order to be effective in Philly and really reach our neighborhoods, we got to have time to reach our neighborhoods and just hang out in our neighborhoods and be with our neighbors. So we're not going to be event-driven in that we're going to try to have these big outreach events and organize these big things that take up a lot of our time. We're going to be small. It's going to be a small church. Our resources are going to be limited. So the best way that we can reach out, the best outreach we can do is have a bunch of unbelievers over to your house and a bunch of Christians and have a movie night. And things like that. We're going to be relationally seeking to have relationships, not necessarily starting with events. And then coupled with that closely is we really need to work hard to be an open community, not a closed community. And by that I mean I don't want evangelism to just be an event that we go to on South Street as we hand out tracts. And there's a place for that. We might do that at some point. So for those of you who love Go, and it's a lot of my background is in kind of contact evangelism. I'm not bashing that. We should do that. And there's a place for it. But I think what I would love to see as a backbone for our evangelism is just to be kind of what the church was like in Acts 2. Church gathered together as a community. They prayed together. They devoted themselves to preaching, to breaking bread, to fellowship, to prayer. And then also, there's a very interesting line at the end of that, isn't there? And the Lord added to their number. So what was happening? They're doing all this kind of Christian stuff, but it wasn't just Christians that were there. There was unbelievers there at the same time. And so I think when I talk about open community, what I mean by is I don't want to have kind of this separate sphere of, well, these are Christian events, so like Bible study, community group, etc. And these are outreach events. No, I think we're going to be doing both at the same time. So as we're sitting around in community group and we're talking about, I'm coming in with a marriage struggle, I want to be comfortable open about that and as honest as I would if everyone was a Christian for, if they've been Christians for 20 years, 20 seconds, or they're still not Christians. It shouldn't change how I share. And so I want to be able to share openly and honestly about what's going on. And then hopefully what's happening is other Christians in the group are going to what? They're going to help me apply the gospel to my marriage. What's happening? The unbeliever's being evangelized. But then say there's an unbeliever there who's opening up about their struggles, to faith, and we're answering questions and we're evangelizing them. Well, what's happening there? The believers are being equipped. And so you can have both happening at the same time. And it's probably going to be really messy. There's going to be all kinds of weird conversations and things that happen, but I think it's going to be beautiful. And I'm excited to kind of not have these separate categories of Christian events and outreach events, but kind of all happening at once. So really, there's only three things our church is going to do to start. And this could get built upon, but just to start. For the first year, we're going to be dedicated to having Sunday morning gatherings, having weekly community groups, and then what I'm phrasing is kitchen table ministry. And kitchen table ministry is that's your outreach. Have people over for dinner. Have your people in your community group over for dinner, and have your unbelieving neighbor over for dinner. And you know what? That's our church. That's the life of our church. I'm going to work as hard as I possibly can to keep our calendar free. And I think that's going to be important for us to keep our calendar free. We're going to prioritize Monday morning meetings, and whenever we decide to do community groups once a week. But then the rest of it is free, and not just free for us to watch TV, not just free for us to catch up on our reading, to have family time, even though family time can be good, but free so that we can actually be hanging out with our neighbors and building a relationship in the parks and the coffee shops and all over. So we want to be dedicated to kitchen table ministry. All right, let me hustle up. What is leadership going to look like in this church plant? This church is going to be led by elders. But I'm going to be the only elder to start, so that's going to it's going to be single to start. Now I say elders though because it is my desire to identify gifted, called, and qualified men as soon as possible, and to get them involved, so there can be a shared plurality of elders. It seems like while the Scripture makes allowances for single elder churches, and it does, the goal is always to have a plurality. So I'll be working hard. I'll view it as one of my main priorities, not just to preach on Sunday morning, but to raise up other elders. And it really is almost 1, 2 on my priority list. But until we have that established eldership, I simply don't want the church to be limited to the scary place that is my own mind and my own gift set. And so I want to benefit from gifted men who maybe they're not pastors, but they're gifted, they're wise, and they're time-tested servants. And so what I want to do is I'm going to have something called an advisory team that will function in exactly that role. Not as pastors, but as advisors that will be able to give real, meaningful counsel on church and leadership and care. I'm going to ask these men to serve for a 1-year term that's renewable, and will keep getting renewed until they seem we either one come to an agreement that it's just for various reasons not working out, or two, which could be seasonal life or multiple things, or two, because we're beginning to have a plurality, which a plurality of pastors just mean the goal would be 3. So not 2, but 3 would be a plurality, and then we would disband the advisory team when that so happens. And what's one of the most encouraging things about this whole church plant for me is that this team has actually already begun to form a little bit. And it's preliminary, so I think God could still add to this team depending on whom the Lord calls and brings. So it's not in stone yet, but it's going to at least be 3 men. And those men are Jim Beatty, Steve Kroll, and Sam Cardillo. I wasn't anticipating getting emotional. But as I say those names, and why they're having somewhat of an effect on me, is not just, well, because of a couple things. If you know those men, you know what a gift they are to this church plant. They know what a sacrifice they are for them to leave this church. And I can't believe they're coming. I can't believe they're coming to serve in this role. And I can't believe the sacrifice that they're making to do so. The financial sacrifice that they're making, the family sacrifice that they're making is unbelievable to me. And so just watching their faith and the faith of their families as they've walked out kind of this we've been talking about this for the past 5 months now, has been blowing my mind. So that's the advisory team, that's the leadership. So how's this church gonna, what's the time frame? Well, right now we're having our interest meetings. April and May, we're going to start identifying the team. I'm going to talk about that process in a second. That's the last thing I'll talk about. And then over the summer, what we're hoping is to have the plant team, over the summer and the fall, plant team move into the city. In the fall, we'll launch some sort of community group or small group ministry, start equipping each other, building community and fellowship. And then in the spring, we'll look to hopefully launch the church sometime. Process for joining this team. If you are considering coming, or maybe even feeling called, I would love to talk to you more. Just get to know you, and hopefully we can just begin to pray together, whether this is something the Lord is calling us to partner in or not. So the first step to be an interest, well, the first step is for everyone, so even if you're just curious, and even if through talking you're like, wow, I was considering, now I'm just curious. If you could please put the card back in there, that'd be really helpful. So the second step, that's the first step. Second step will be, if you go online, there's an interest form. And if you could it just asks, like, I think 4 basic questions. If you could just fill out the interest form, that will get kicked to me, and as soon as I get that, I will set up a meeting with you. just to draw you out a little bit more about what you're thinking, why is this sparking your interest, hopefully give it's an opportunity for you to get to me a little better, me to you a little better, and we can talk about the future a little bit more. So that's not a commitment, not even close to a commitment. If you're, that's just, hey, still just thinking about this. So fill out the interest form. That's kind of the first step. You can fill that out. You can fill it out tonight if you want. You can fill it out anytime throughout March. Hopefully they'll all be filled out by April. I'll begin having those meetings. So that'll be kind of the first meeting, and then at the end of that meeting, depending on what we're talking about, then I'll probably give you some actually more detailed application, which would then be just more specific questions to really make sure that you're thinking about this and you really understand what you're getting into. So that would be that process. And then once you get that application, take that home, pray about it, seek counsel on it, fill it out. When you handed that second application in, that would be your formal declaration that you are really committing to coming. It's still not a final, because you still would need to pray about it, and we both need to decide together where this is going to be a partnership. But that would be your way of saying, like, I really think the Lord has this for me. And so we'll set up that meeting, which will include me, as well as one of your other pastors. The other pastors of the church or community group leaders, just other people that can be involved, and we can all be praying about this together. And then at the end of that meeting, which will begin taking place in May, that's when we will really look to identify who's on the team and who's going to be coming.